I'm so proud of the Princess Catherine going to Croc, becoming the royal patron and going out there and talking to all these people, because it gives everybody that wonderful feeling that they are being listened to. The Prince and Princess were at Southport today. You know, really, they're incredible people. I think the Princess has done a beautiful job.
When Sarah Ferguson opened her mouth, the palace trembled. But no one could have predicted just how much she would reveal about Catherine's rise and Camilla's quiet fall. It began innocently enough. There she sat on the plush interview chair, poised and confident, the Duchess of York, returning to public view after months of silence. Sarah's smile carried a warmth that seemed to disarm the interviewer immediately, but it was that subtle glint of mischief in her eyes that betrayed the storm brewing beneath. In a single breath, she managed to light up the room and set fire to the carefully guarded walls of Buckingham Palace. She began with gracious words, her voice soft yet deliberate. "Catherine," she said, "is a force the monarchy has never seen. A woman of quiet power and unstoppable grace. Watching her navigate this past year," she paused there, letting the words hang, letting the weight of them sink in. "Well, it's nothing short of extraordinary." Cameras caught her leaning forward then, as though the next words couldn't be contained. "She's the kind of leader this family has been waiting for, a beacon." But what truly electrified the nation wasn't what Sarah said, it was what she didn't. When asked directly about Queen Camilla's role in the royal family's future, Sarah offered only the faintest of smiles, then uttered a sentence so cryptic it set the internet ablaze. "It's Catherine's time now," she said with quiet certainty. The summit made that clear. The interviewer blinked, almost missing the weight of what had just been revealed. But outside that studio, no one missed it. Within minutes, social media erupted in a frenzy. Clips of the interview flooded timelines, and hashtags like #Bravo Queen Catherine and #Summit Secrets trended worldwide. Royal commentators scrambled to make sense of it. Was this just admiration, or a subtle confirmation of something far bigger? In living rooms across Britain and beyond, the whispers began. This didn't sound like mere praise. This sounded like a declaration. A carefully worded unveiling of a decision made far from cameras and microphones. Behind the scenes, palace aides reportedly fielded frantic calls as speculation surged. Was Catherine truly poised to eclipse Camilla? Was the queen consort willingly stepping aside or being quietly removed? And what exactly happened at this so-called summit Sarah mentioned? What everyone could agree on was that Sarah's words weren't accidental. She knew exactly what she was doing. Years of royal survival had taught her the power of a well-timed phrase, and this was perfectly timed. As the video clips continued to circulate, and the world began to question the true balance of power inside the palace walls, Sarah simply smiled and walked away, leaving behind a storm she clearly intended to start. But the seeds of this royal upheaval weren't planted on live television. They were sown in the shadows of Balmoral, weeks before Sarah spoke. Behind the grandeur of Balmoral's stone walls, a clandestine meeting of the monarchy's most powerful players unfolded, and nothing was ever the same again. In the frosted hush of early 2025, as the world outside was distracted by ceremonial pomp, something far more consequential was brewing inside the royal family's Scottish retreat. Balmoral, usually a sanctuary of privacy and tradition, had been summoned into the center of a storm. Insiders began whispering about a highly unusual gathering, urgent call to arms that few dared decline. And those who attended knew that what was about to unfold would alter the monarchy forever. Every detail of the guest list raised eyebrows. King Charles, his face set with purpose despite the weight of illness, presided over the meeting. To his right, Prince William and Catherine sat side by side, silent but attentive, their eyes meeting only once. Across from them, Queen Camilla sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly, while Princess Anne's penetrating gaze and the quiet presence of the Duke of Kent added to the solemnity of the moment. It was a rare full-house summit, and the stakes were nothing less than the future of the crown. Although Sarah Ferguson wasn't there in person, she didn't have to be. Palace insiders claim she was briefed almost immediately by a trusted ally, someone close enough to the throne to witness every word and wise enough to know which ones to share. Accounts of the meeting later described it as nothing short of explosive. Heated arguments ricocheted off the stone walls, cutting through what was once a peaceful retreat. Voices rose, followed by sharp silences, each pause more deafening than the last. What began as polite discussion quickly dissolved into icy standoffs, and shocking proposals that no one expected to hear voiced aloud, at least not yet. The agenda was clear, if brutal: how to protect the monarchy's fragile image and ensure its relevance in a world that seemed increasingly disinterested in royal tradition. Charles's health was no longer a secret within those walls, and his acknowledgement of his own limitations only added to the urgency. The conversation turned to who could shoulder the weight of representing the crown publicly, connecting with a generation hungry for authenticity. Here, the fractures began to widen. Catherine's name was mentioned not as a princess, but as a possible queen-in-waiting, the face of a new monarchy. Camilla's reaction, according to one observer, was instant and unrestrained. Her chair scraped back as she left the room in what some described as a quiet fury. Not once, but twice she excused herself, returning only after the murmurs had cooled. And yet through it all, Catherine remained composed, watching, listening, waiting. She didn't need to raise her voice or slam her fist. Every word she spoke, measured and resolute, made its mark without spectacle, and at the center of it all stood Catherine, poised, determined, and quietly rewriting history while the cameras remained outside. She entered the summit as the Princess of Wales. She left it with something far greater: the crown of the public's heart and perhaps the monarchy itself. The room, already tense with expectation, fell silent when Catherine rose to speak. What followed was not the timid, dutiful tone the family might have anticipated, but a quiet authority that startled even her fiercest detractors. With a calm that belied the stakes, she spoke of a monarchy that no longer hid behind gilded gates, but stood shoulder to shoulder with the people it claimed to serve. She spoke of real, human connection, and how without it, the monarchy would not just fade, but fracture. Her words, they say, were not grandiose, but they cut deep. She spoke of transparency, of tearing down the walls of silence that for decades had kept the royals untouchable, but also unknowable. She spoke of compassion as a duty, not a performance, and how the monarchy's greatest strength was its ability to listen, not dictate. Her voice, steady and unwavering, filled the space with a vision so sharp and irresistible, it left Charles and William visibly moved. One insider would later reveal that William gripped her hand under the table when she finished, as though realizing perhaps for the first time what she was truly capable of. Even Sarah Ferguson, in her interview days later, could not hide her admiration. Her words, she said with a knowing smile, made even Anne tear up, and if you know Anne, you know how impossible that is. That single comment alone ignited the rumor that Catherine's speech wasn't just impressive, it was transformative. But not everyone in that room was ready to applaud. Across the table, Camilla bristled visibly. As Catherine painted her vision of a modern monarchy, Camilla reportedly interrupted, reminding the room that tradition was not just a word but the very foundation of their power. Catherine did not flinch. According to accounts, she simply returned Camilla's gaze and responded that tradition should never be a cage. The words hung in the air long after she sat back down. And yet, it was impossible to ignore that Catherine's popularity outside those walls had already begun to eclipse Camilla's. The public still carried the image of her, frail but unbroken, during her cancer journey, standing before the world with unshakable grace. She had become more than a princess. She had become a symbol of resilience. Perhaps that was why, at the end of the summit, King Charles allegedly gave her not only his blessing but also his trust. According to one source, he leaned toward her and said simply, "It's yours now." And just like that, key responsibilities, symbolic power, and the weight of the monarchy's future rested on her shoulders, and she bore it with quiet determination. But with every rise comes a fall, and Camilla's reaction revealed just how seismic Catherine's ascent had become. The queen consort, once untouchable, now watched as her influence melted away and her smile no longer reached her eyes. In the days following the summit, the signs of Camilla's retreat became impossible to ignore. She was conspicuously absent from two major royal events, the French state visit and Trooping the Color, moments where her presence had once been unquestionable. The public noticed. The cameras noticed. And though the palace issued vague statements about rest and private commitments, the silence said more than the words ever could. Behind the palace doors, the whispers grew louder. This was no ordinary absence. Palace insiders began describing her as visibly wounded, though she never allowed her composure to break in public. To those who encountered her, she seemed gracious, even kind, but something in her had shifted. She smiled, but her eyes gave nothing away. and when asked about the summit by a staff member, she reportedly offered only a thin reply, "Decisions have been made." And then she excused herself. What followed next was even more telling. Camilla left Buckingham Palace entirely and retreated to Ray Mill House, her private sanctuary in the countryside. For weeks, she remained there, shunning the grandeur of London, declining public engagements, and cancelling appearances that had been on the calendar for months. For someone who had fought so long to stand in the light of the monarchy, to now vanish into its shadows seemed both shocking and deeply symbolic. Conflicting accounts swirled through the press. Some claimed she had chosen this retreat, insisting she was weary of the spotlight and happy to let the next generation shine. Others whispered that she had been gently pushed aside, her role reduced to little more than a ceremonial figure while Catherine stepped into power. And then there were those who wondered if this was Camilla's quiet protest, her way of showing that she would not go quietly, even if she stayed silent. When Sarah was asked about Camilla in her now infamous interview, her response was equally enigmatic. "She's at peace," Sarah said, her tone measured, her words carefully chosen. But it was what she didn't say that spoke volumes. Not once did she mention Camilla by name again, choosing instead to lavish praise on Catherine and speak of the future, as though Camilla was already a memory. The public response was equally divided. Many sympathized with Camilla, recalling the decades of scrutiny and cruelty she had endured to stand at Charles's side. Yet, others began to speak openly of how refreshing Catherine's presence felt, how much hope she inspired compared to the tired weight of tradition that Camilla seemed to carry. And as Camilla faded quietly into the background, the public began to embrace Catherine more fervently, and the palace adjusted accordingly. One woman knows what it feels like to fall from royal grace, and now she's helping another rise to it. Sarah Ferguson's own story is steeped in scandal, survival, and redemption, and it is precisely this that makes her alliance with Catherine so compelling. Once ostracized and humiliated under the unrelenting glare of the royal spotlight, Fergie clawed her way back into favor through patience, resilience, and a shrewd understanding of palace dynamics. Her quiet re-emergence over the past few years, coinciding with Catherine's ascent, feels almost poetic between two women, separated by generations, but bound by the same merciless scrutiny and the same determination to endure it. Their connection reportedly began in private, behind closed doors, far from the eyes of press and courtiers. Over tea at Kensington Palace, they began to trade stories and whispered advice at Sandringham dinners, knowing glances exchanged during tense family gatherings. In Sarah, Catherine found someone who understood the hidden rules of royal survival, someone who could see the traps before they were set. And in Catherine, Sarah saw a figure strong enough to lead the monarchy into a new era, a woman capable of carrying the future without flinching. According to insiders, it was Sarah who coached Catherine through some of her most difficult weeks. When public opinion teetered during her health battle, when gossip columns speculated cruelly about her future, when whispers of Camilla's displeasure grew louder, Sarah was there, steady, offering guidance that only someone who had lived it could give. "You walk through fire," Sarah reportedly told her, "and then you walk back out, always back out." Their bond deepened as Catherine faced not only the weight of her public duties, but also the undercurrents of resistance from within the family itself. Both women had faced icy receptions, both had endured being measured against impossible standards, and both had learned to master silence as their sharpest weapon. This shared experience forged something powerful, not just camaraderie, but strategy. When asked in her interview what she thought of Catherine's rise, Sarah's answer was both blunt and poignant. "She's not just a princess," she declared, her voice thick with conviction. "She's a queen in waiting, and I'll stand beside her." That one line sent ripples through the royal world. It wasn't just support, it was endorsement. And perhaps, most intriguing of all, palace sources suggest their unlikely alliance may have given Catherine the confidence she carried into Balmoral. Those whispered conversations, the quiet mentorship, the hard-earned wisdom passed between them all culminated in that moment when Catherine stood tall, unshaken, and laid claim to the monarchy's future. But the true magnitude of what transpired at the summit only became clear when the public began to notice Camilla's conspicuous absence from pivotal royal moments. Event after event, the question grew louder. Where was Queen Camilla? And what was the palace hiding? It began quietly, almost subtle enough to miss. At the French state visit, an occasion that demanded full royal presence, Camilla was nowhere to be seen. The cameras focused on Catherine, dazzling and authoritative as she greeted dignitaries, her every move scrutinized. The queen consort's absence was brushed aside as a minor inconvenience, an issue of rest, as the official palace statement tersely phrased it. But then came Trooping the Color, the monarchy's most iconic public display, and again, Camilla was missing from the balcony. Whispers grew louder. When she failed to appear for Commonwealth Day, those whispers turned into roars. The palace continued issuing carefully worded statements, each more vague than the last. They spoke of personal time, of health considerations, of the queen needing a well-earned respite from her duties. But these explanations only deepened the mystery, because behind the scenes, something far more unsettling appeared to be unfolding. Leaked photographs, reportedly taken by neighbors near Ray Mill House, showed Camilla alone in her garden, pruning roses, and sitting with a book under a tree. She appeared serene, but her isolation ignited speculation. Was this self-imposed exile? Or was she being quietly sidelined? The images splashed across front pages, fueling stories of a queen removed from her throne, forced to watch her kingdom slip away from the quiet of her countryside retreat. The rumors intensified when reports emerged that Camilla's personal staff, the aides, secretaries, and attendants who had served her faithfully for years, were being reassigned to other royals. To some, it looked like nothing short of a dismantling of her household, a stripping of her authority masked by polite euphemisms. Then came the photographs no one could ignore. Paparazzi caught her leaving a small shop near Ray Mill, dressed plainly, walking alone, her expression weary and contemplative. The pictures, stark and raw, sparked a media frenzy. The tabloids branded her the disappearing queen, while opinion pieces debated whether she had been edged out or had chosen to vanish before she was erased completely. And just when it seemed the speculation couldn't grow more intense, Sarah Ferguson, never one to shy from a cryptic remark, delivered a chilling line in her second interview. "Sometimes you step back," she said, her voice low, almost daring the audience to read between the words. "And sometimes you're pushed." That single statement reverberated through the press, igniting a firestorm of questions the palace seemed unwilling or unable to answer. As Camilla's silence deepened, Catherine's voice grew louder, and her first public move after the summit stunned the world. In the shadow of uncertainty, she stood before the world and claimed her place not with a crown of gold, but with the weight of destiny on her shoulders. The French state visit was always intended to be a showcase of Britain's enduring grace, but no one could have predicted that it would become Catherine's defining moment, her coronation in spirit. As the royal family gathered to greet foreign dignitaries and reaffirm alliances, all eyes turned, not to Charles, nor to the absent Camilla, but to Catherine. When she stepped forward to deliver her speech, her words ignited the room, and beyond it, a nation. The address was nothing short of electrifying. She spoke of unity, resilience, and a shared future, not just as a formality, but with the conviction of someone who believed every word. The applause that followed was more than a polite ceremony. It was thunderous, sustained, and deeply personal. It was in that instant, many said, that the monarchy no longer seemed like a relic of the past, but a beacon for the future. What followed over the next few days solidified her dominance. Catherine chaired key meetings with foreign officials, effortlessly commanding the room and even drawing praise from notoriously reserved diplomats. At the evening banquet, she moved gracefully among heads of state, her poise so striking that even Charles appeared content to let her lead. And when the press compared the two, it was Catherine who shone brighter. Public sentiment mirrored the moment. Polls released just days after the event revealed unprecedented approval ratings for her numbers. Even her staunchest supporters hadn't dared imagine. Headlines the following morning left little to the imagination. "Queen Catherine in all but name," one paper declared. Another simply called her the People's Queen. The words splashed across front pages in bold letters, signaling what many believed to be an irreversible shift. But the most telling moment came not from the public, but from Sarah Ferguson, standing just behind Catherine at one of the receptions. Observers caught her beaming as Catherine moved through the crowd, her lips forming a single, unmistakable word: bravo. It wasn't just an endorsement, it was a benediction. Yet, behind the glory, there was another story unfolding, quiet but unmistakable. Reports surfaced that Camilla watched the entire event unfold from Ray Mill, uninvited and unacknowledged, left to witness Catherine's triumph from afar. Those close to her described her reaction as stoic, but no one could truly know what she felt, as the woman once in her shadow stepped fully into the light. But even in her quiet retreat, Camilla wasn't done, and the final act of this royal drama had yet to unfold. What was whispered behind closed doors now roared into the open, and the monarchy's most guarded secrets spilled into the light. It began with an anonymous leak. What appeared to be minutes from the Balmoral summit surfaced in the press late one evening, igniting a firestorm the palace could not contain. At first, officials denied the authenticity of the documents, but within hours, corroborating details began to emerge. The revelations were staggering. Catherine, the documents confirmed, had been formally designated the face of the monarchy, entrusted with steering the institution into a new era. This wasn't just symbolism, it was a mandate. The papers went further. They detailed how her role would encompass not only her existing patronages, but also newly created initiatives intended to cement her as the monarchy's public and moral center. She was to lead high-level engagements, spearhead modernization efforts, and embody the royal family's vision to reconnect with younger generations. The tone of the language was unequivocal. Catherine was no longer waiting in the wings, she was stepping squarely into the light. But there was another side to those minutes, and it was even more incendiary. Camilla's duties were described as being streamlined to her personal passions, an artful way of saying her influence would be reduced. Her responsibilities pared down to what could be quietly managed from the sidelines. The note suggested she resisted this realignment at first, raising concerns over tradition and precedent, but ultimately she appeared to accept the decision, though not without bruised pride. It was Sarah Ferguson, however, who poured fuel on the already blazing fire. In an unguarded moment during yet another interview, she uttered the words that confirmed what many now believed. "It was decided that day," she said simply, her voice carrying an almost reverent weight. "Catherine would lead us into the future." The public reaction was immediate, impassioned, and divided. On one side, hashtags like #Team Catherine trended globally, celebrating her ascent as a necessary and hopeful change. On the other, a countercurrent of sympathy emerged for Camilla, embodied in the equally viral number Justice for Camilla. Supporters of the Queen Consort decried what they called a calculated humiliation of a woman who had stood by Charles for decades. For a moment, it seemed the palace itself might split under the weight of these revelations. Loyalists to each camp traded barbed statements, while Buckingham's official channels frantically tried to downplay the leak as misinterpreted context. Yet the damage was done. The truth, or at least a version of it, was now public. And as the palace scrambles to control the narrative, Sarah Ferguson emerges once more, delivering a closing message that leaves the world breathless. With the world watching and the monarchy at a crossroads, Sarah delivered her final verdict, and it was as shocking as it was heartfelt. She returned for a second interview, her eyes sharper this time, her voice even steadier. If anyone thought the backlash from her earlier revelations would silence her, they were mistaken. Sarah sat before the cameras, unrepentant, as though the weight of the palace's fury only strengthened her resolve. "Catherine," she began, her tone laced with certainty, "is already our queen. The rest is just a ceremony." The words hung in the air like a challenge, reverberating far beyond the walls of the studio. There was no ambiguity left now. She spoke directly to the nation, openly thanking Camilla for her years of service. "A woman who stood by her king through fire," she said, acknowledging the decades of scrutiny and sacrifice, but her gratitude was brief. The pivot back to Catherine was swift and uncompromising. "The people have chosen," she declared, her voice dropping to a near whisper, though the impact was deafening. "And the future has a name." Days later, Catherine and William were seen at a charity gala, walking hand in hand. But what turned the moment into a symbol was Sarah herself, standing proudly beside them. Cameras caught the embrace, Catherine leaning into Sarah, William offering her a quiet nod of respect. It was a public acknowledgement of an alliance now impossible to ignore, and an unmistakable sign that the old guard was giving way to something new. And yet, even as Catherine basked in her triumph, and Camilla receded further into the background, the Queen Consort's camp finally broke its silence. In a carefully worded statement, her spokesperson offered a rare glimpse of grace and resilience. "Her Majesty supports the future wholeheartedly," it read. But behind the polished language, many sensed a quiet bitterness, a concession that was anything but voluntary. Sarah, however, refused to let the conversation end there. As the interview drew to a close, the journalist asked if this was all there was to say, if the story was now complete. A slow, knowing smile spread across her face as she leaned forward, her final words slicing through the air with precision. "You haven't heard the half of it yet," she murmured, a glint of mischief in her eyes. And with that, she stood, leaving the world breathless once more. And so, the stage is set. A monarchy divided yet united, its future hanging in the balance, with Catherine and Sarah at the center of a story still being written. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.